Okay, so I'm going to introduce myself again. Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle Ori, the Director of Career Services at Computer Coach. We are a tech school based in Tampa Bay, Florida, and we specialize in a variety of IT and business courses that are in full-time and part-time and also live online. The five key areas that we focus on are coding, cybersecurity, infrastructure or cloud, data, and then project management or digital marketing, sort of those tech adjacent topics. I'm really, really excited to hand this over, but just so you know, if you want to get in contact with us to learn more about our programs, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Hey, Seth.
Hey, thanks for the
Hey.
introduction. Happy to be here. Happy to present this topic. As we titled today, Thinking Outside the Socks. If you know me, I'm a huge fan of puns, wordplay. Pretty par for the course for me, but leveraging skills to improve cyber career. I think this is important for me specifically, and why I wanted to talk about it because kind of around maybe a mid-career mark for me. I was really, all over IT, had a lot of exposure into different things, but I was really interested in cyber, really enjoyed the work that I was doing in there, but I just didn't have a lot of guidance, I guess. And, a lot of the people that I looked to and had some mentorship with, I had, just different varying experiences with the advice that I received. And so, maybe just a few years ago, I kind of came across a pretty important topic, which I'll go over today. And I feel like that was what kind of turned the light on in my head about, what I needed to do and what are some ways that I could apply myself. And, I'm happy to share that with you all today. So jumping into it, a little bit about me, right? Governance, risk, and compliance manager for cybersecurity. So I oversee a lot of the cybersecurity programs, specifically in the healthcare space. I come from a consulting and IT services background. Started that in 2011. And then kind of transitioned into pursuing some more cybersecurity type domain knowledge. Got CISM in about 2020. And then since there, I've been kind of a full-time, cyber practitioner in various roles. In a quick little statement piece about my opinions, this is a representative of my own anecdotes and experience. They're not reflective of any organization or anybody that I work with. This is specifically my journey, and a lot of the things that I've discovered, with networking, my own career path, and my own personal experiences. So the topic at today really comes from, some of my own personal study that I did years ago. Probably some of you have maybe come across, some similar things to where, the topic that I came across this from was from a book called Range. And a lot of the people that I've spoke to, especially, early career IT students, I probably bring this up. This is probably required reading for anybody I talk to as far as any mentorship opportunities because it was absolutely instrumental in the way that changed my philosophy about my own education, my own experiences, and then what I could do to bring that to the table for my own career. So early in my career, as I mentioned, this was starting in 2011. I worked in various IT roles, going to consulting to smaller services to system administration. I dabbled in a bit of everything, right? So I was doing networking, help desk, servers, cloud, just everything in between. I actually got started into IT around that 2011. My first intro was actually into programming. I really enjoyed software development. When I first started into IT, and really kind of picking up computers, my goal and what I had in my mind was going to be a software developer. And so, I went through all these things and I just kept finding things that I enjoyed and just all the different knowledge that I was able to obtain and the skill sets. And, I enjoyed walking into a new field of IT and there's a new challenge, learning something new, being more familiar with topics, different lingo and things to master. And I just enjoyed all of that. And then when I was talking to mentors, people that I personally knew, whether it was family members or just people that I know that have had, a 20 to 25-year career in IT. And I was like, hey, what advice do you have? I like this and I've done this. And, I'm jack of all trades, master of none. I'm, mile long, inch deep in a lot of these topics. And they're all interesting, but I don't really have any guidance of, I don't want to settle down and pick a certain topic. And a lot of the times, most of the times that I was faced with these conversations, they were, specialized and thrive. And I understand what they were coming through, about, picking a certain domain and just becoming, a global expert in that field, and, totally valid. But for some reason, that just didn't appeal to me, and then, like I said, kind of earlier in my intro, starting around 2019, 2020, I was able to kind of transition from IT and move into the security domain, and then, take that from not just being a traditional security engineer, but overseeing, cybersecurity at kind of a compliance level, and then being responsible to some degree with some of the technical implementations. And so I was very thankful and blessed to have that opportunity, but I wasn't really sure what I could chalk it up to. Maybe it was luck, maybe stars and moon aligning type thing, but I don't really know what I did or how I conveyed that. And then shortly after kind of starting that early into that career, I was actually at a security conference, and somebody recommended the book Range. I was like, okay, I'll pick it up. I like to do personal development and reading in my own time. And I got through maybe the first 22 pages of the book. I'm like, this is it, right? I think this was a huge, opening for me, because I had all these generalist skills, but the way that, and I'll come there into the next slide, the way how David Epstein here kind of poses it, really just makes a ton of sense for me. And a lot of people that I know in the career field, right? I have a lot of people that I spoke to that were in the career for 20 years, and they were saying specialize, specialize, specialize. Oh, but I really enjoyed my time as you know, as a bartender, or something way off the wall, because that gave me this type of skill set to deal with boardroom meetings and public speaking and all this stuff. But they were always telling me to do something specific within the IT domain. And so this is really what I want to bring up for everybody here, and just talking about how that really opened my eyes to kind of lean into some other things that wasn't specifically into the realm of security. So again, first 22 pages of the book, right? The kind of opening monologue here that David brings into the story of Range. And again, I won't spoil it, because I highly recommend everybody that's interested in this read it. But he kind of proposes two ideologies, right? Tiger Woods and Roger Federer. Not a huge fan of either golf or tennis, but I do respect these guys are some of the most well-known masters of the sport. Some of you that may be familiar with Tiger Woods' story is his father, not necessarily single-handedly, made Tiger who he was, but from an early age, he kind of helped Tiger, from I think a toddler. He was a preschooler, learn to swing a club. Um, Pretty much from the time he was able to hold a golf club, he mastered and perfected everything that there is in golf. Roger, on the other hand, who's an absolute Swiss champion when it comes to tennis, he played in a little bit of everything. He didn't find tennis until much later into his life, but he was pretty much an all-star athlete. He attributed to playing basketball, baseball, soccer, everything that in between, and he had so many different domains and sports he followed and enjoyed. And it wasn't until much later in his life that he really found an angle that he had with playing tennis. And a lot of the attributions, actually, Roger actually goes on record a couple times, in interviews and publications, about he believes a lot of his success was because he was able to hone his skills and across multiple domains, and then his ability to kind of preserve himself just through burnout. And I think that's a huge topic when it comes to cybersecurity, because I feel like, talking to people early to mid-career, I think they get intimidated by the education, right? There's a lot of learning that needs to happen in cyber, and there's a lot of expansion. And I think looking for alternative ways to train those skills, and to look for ways to, okay, how can I hone my public speaking presence? How can I be a better asset to my peers? Maybe that isn't cyber specific training. Maybe you can go, join a drama team, or go do, something, a lot more fun and engaging, but you can use the skill sets you hone in that small group to bring over into your career. And so that's what I want to highlight as some of the examples, that I think is very apt for people in their early career. This slide, I wanted to kind of illustrate. It's kind of wordy and heavy. One of the things that I highly recommend, especially for people that's not familiar with it, if you're familiar with NIST as the organization, they have what they call the NICE framework. And the NICE framework is basically NIST's draft reference architecture of all the different domains and work roles that are in a cyber organization. So you can kind of see here, 52 different work roles. So that's basically 52 different job titles or accountability structures that we could see in an enterprise cybersecurity organization. Of those 52 roles, there's 11 different competency areas. So it's going to be very difficult to hire a single individual that is going to have extreme competency in all 11 subjects. And I think this is important because, like I said, this is a very not demanding in the sense of do or die, but demanding in the sense of there is going to be some education. You are going to have to, learn certain things, particularly well in order to kind of become a master in it. But ideally, what I want to illustrate here is that with all these domains and all these experts and all these skills that are required, what I think can really help early people into their career is figure out not only what competency area that they can focus on, but what skill set do they bring to the table that may be unique for that domain, right? Maybe you're in a SOC, maybe you're doing incident respond, but maybe after your years of doing, bartending or, public, some sort of hospitality or retail, during a very busy season navigating all these things, maybe you can talk about, okay, I can work really well under pressure in high stakes environments, and I could be an asset to a SOC team because if something happens, I have a almost an immune response to be able to panic or to be able to communicate strategically under abnormal circumstances. So that's kind of what I want to bring into that. Definitely recommend this. This is a great resource for you to kind of find the textbook definition. One of my, I guess, larger issues with some of the cyber workforce and strategies here is that there leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to job descriptions and what's expected out of a true role. So it's great, to kind of get a reference here of what leading industry experts within this domain actually attribute to a certain skill set. But again, just wanting to illustrate just how deep the rabbit hole can go into cyber and how there's multiple opportunities for people of all different backgrounds and specializations to be here. And I think this is important because, again, I talk with a lot of people, within the field, at my level higher. And even in just my experience, I think a lot of cyber companies are asking to do more with less, right? Some of us have probably heard that, that there's been a lot of ebb and flow when it comes to the job market, right? There's a lot of things, cyber's in demand, cyber's in demand, cyber's in demand. People just go through a full blitzkrieg to try to get education, to try to get in the workforce. And they're like, hey, I got this security certificate. I completed this degree. I went through this boot camp and I'm still struggling to find a job. And I think a lot of that isn't, a lot of people's fault. This isn't a particular issue with some of these, the applicants. I think a lot of it is with these organizations. They're having to be very strategic. They're having to be very, some of these processes are going drawn out where I'm hearing people taking 3, 4, 5 interviews in order to get just, sometimes, entry level positions. And I think what is valuable in a way that we can, discuss here and I'm hoping to attribute is a lot of these teams are having to do more with less. And, I think of this kind of like in a sports analogy, think of the salary caps, the different, limits that they have on a team. And we can't just you can't build a stacked team. You can't build an ultimate team of, less than 10 people with absolute rock stars. Most organizations just don't have the ability to recruit talent like that, pay for talent like that. There's always a hole for people that have general skills or have maybe uncovered talents that they can bring to a team. And that's where I want to try to, coach people and look to apply myself. Hey, I may not be the best, analyst or incident response, person, but I was a camp counselor for years, or I was a certain mentor, or I led these different chapter groups, and I'm a really good team player. I'm really good at motivating people on my team. Being able to figure out some of the soft skills. So when you're maybe you are at a disadvantage for some of the technical things. And a lot of times when I'm talking with peers and even seeing myself, I can teach you technical, but I can't teach you how to be a good team player. So learning how to advocate for yourself and the soft skills and the range that you have is extremely valuable, especially when there's a lot of limitations when it comes to building out cyber teams, and we have to be very strategic on who we put in these positions. Again, when I started with this, Again, people were talking about, go be a VMware, person, go be a networking engineer, go be, know everything in the world there is to be about Active Directory because, they make, $200,000 a year, $160,000 in. If you get, if you become a site reliability engineer for Netflix, you'll make 500,000. There's all of these grand scheme type, career opportunities for people that have very specialized knowledge. And I don't want to take away from that. And one of the things, I wanted to highlight here is, here's the position, well into the six figures, great salary for a senior mainframe developer. So this is a job position for someone writing COBOL and doing IBM mainframe development, still making six figures, 30 years past the prime of some of these applications. And so there's always an angle whether the skill is relevant or not. And then, we're looking here for a specific director for SailPoint, which is an identity and access management system. Very good salary, very good market rate. Travelers is a major insurance company. So again, having specialized knowledge does lead to, can lead to great salaries. But I think, kind of a favorite experience, there's always a high paying position for people in niche roles. You can make $75,000 a year telling people how great this wine is. I mean, there's specialization is not just immune to cyber or IT. There's always going to be, that 1%, 3%, 5% market for people that have very specialized skills and have very specialized knowledge. But again, that's a very limited amount of an audience. And I'm thinking for people earlier in their career that are looking to transition and to get more and grow into their opportunities here. I think that's a big point, is that they're always going to be specialized. And that's true. There's great value in that. And if that's what you choose to do and you really enjoy that domain, by all means, there's not a one size, answer to this. But I think it's important to illustrate that it's not the only option. And when you're trying to get into, a specific field, having a wide range of skills and having a lot of, malleability into becoming, a different, a key, key player in an organization is what's more valuable, right? Not specifically, investing into a single opportunity. So the big question and what I really wanted to illustrate out of this is, how do people in their early career, generalists, early cyber entrants, maybe people coming, out of school, maybe people already in IT that are looking to kind of take that step, how do you get ahead? What can you do to position yourself to show more than what you have today? And I think that the answer is, well, where are you? Where are you at in your life? Are you fresh into school, fresh out of school or even in school? And, what is kind of your resume today? What makes you you? And I think that's important because, I think when I talk to people, and just, I don't have this, or I'm working on building a lab or blah, blah, blah. And then they kind of dismiss something like, yeah, I was a part of a cyber team where we helped high school kids learn to code, or, we did junior something. I'm like, well, whoa, hang on, talk about that. Like, how did you do that? You were mentoring people into coding and security, but yeah, you don't have a security role today, but you do have some domain knowledge. And I think that's very important, is to figure out and do a little bit of introspection and figuring out like, okay, what do I have today? What are the skill sets that I did? Maybe I'm not, I don't have, I've been a professional in 10 to 15 years, but maybe I don't have, 5 years, 3 years, 2 years of cyber experience. But what are some things that you can look back on and say, okay, well, I don't have any experience working as a help desk, but I did customer support for, you know, a telephone company, or customer support for a certain retail chain, and helping people get through problems and working through solutions and things like that. And so, how can you frame things um, eloquently and confidently to say that, okay, I don't have this technical exposure, but I do have these kind of cross domain skills, and here's why I believe that that could be a value add. And I think this is important because there are so many different avenues that we position ourselves in. I'm a big fan of Adam Grant and some of the work he does. He's an organizational psychologist and professor, and a lot of the stuff that he posts and a lot of his writings are about workforce psychology. And I think that's extremely important in the field of cyber, because you're going to get multiple personalities. You're going to get tons of different stakeholders and people that have a vested interest in cybersecurity, but may not have, a drop of technical knowledge. And so I think it's important for us as professionals to not only think with our cyber hats and just be completely, uh, you know, neck deep in some of the cyber technical jargon, but figure out, okay, yes, I am a cyber practitioner. I am an analyst. I'm an engineer, but I do have these different paths. One of the things he talks about is preacher, prosecutor, politician, and scientist. And again, on the wordy part of the screen here, I think it's important because throughout our professional careers, we're going to engage these four different roles. We're going to be saying this is why this needs to happen, and this is what we need to do, and this is why this idea is wrong, and this is why I'm right, and here's the facts that I'm showing that this is why we need to get this done. And learning how to navigate all four forms of that is extremely important, and not just being an LLM of cyber knowledge and jargon. That's not as eloquent when it comes to actually implementing cybersecurity programs. And I think my career path and kind of journey into tech was a little atypical, compared to a lot of my peers. I had a lot of peers, that, or maybe some of the stereotypes for people in cyber were, the big math nerds, the people that were doing, physics for fun and taking, college algebra in their junior year of high school because, they were just, math wizards and they just knew a lot of the tech and the numbers. That really wasn't a thing for me. I think I kind of took an adjacent path, and I really enjoy literature and political science and debating and student councils. And looking back on it now, that's much more important to where I'm at in my career, because a lot of times I'm a middleman. I'm going to engineers, I'm going to software developers, I'm going to different stakeholders, and I'm doing that preacher and politician. I have to say, this is why we got to get this done. This is what we're doing. This is why it's important. How can I help you? And then I got to take that back. And then I have to go be a scientist and tell the engineers, the developers, the technical teams, and say, okay, this is what we need to get done. These are the business requirements. And a lot of this is happening over video conferences, over emails, over Teams, over just written language. And I think now my ability to communicate that effectively has a lot to do with a lot of the education that I received and being able to articulate points and how to counter points and how to like not blow up at somebody when they say something absolutely stupid in front of everyone. And I think all these skills are very, very important, and something that if you do have that ability and you do have those soft sides of communication, making sure that you figure a way to advocate for yourself when it comes to your resume, to your interviews, to your mentoring capabilities, because I think that is an extremely undervalued skill, but it has just as much, if not a little bit more, than some of the technical knowledge. And I think this all sounds great in theory, right? Where we're talking about, okay, yes, I get what you're saying, brush up on my communication, do this, what does this really have a value to me? And I've heard about this story for years, even before, I started really thinking about the philosophy of it. And this is actually a lot more popular now. I mean, I think anybody that follows any of the professional sports, you hear this a lot, right? Where a lot of these high profile athletes aren't sitting there running jugs machines and running drills. They're taking ballet, Pilates, tennis, soccer, wrestling, all these different sports and different, specializations, because it brings an element to their game that they can give a competitive advantage to. A great point of this is Lynn Swan in 1976, right? Way before, TikTok and Instagram and everybody's sharing, LeBron doing Pilates in his gym floor at, 9 in the morning on a Saturday, before all this stuff got really, headway into our life cycle. He was talking about, he performed ballet, and the crazy catches that he's had. I think, when I was doing the research on this, that some of his catches were in the top 5, top 10 of all time contested uh, uh, catches at his level. And a lot of his attributions to that was because the balance and the strength and the poise that he was able to perfect in the art of ballet gave him an advantage to outmaneuver people on the field. And I think there's no better example of that, of what an outside element could bring to your game at some of the highest of levels, within any career. And I think that's extremely important into cyber, is being able to figure out what elements and what sports activities events you can do and you can plug yourself into that can bring an element to your game that makes you an asset to the team. And so again, this whole thing is really, I'm hoping, getting wheels turning, right? Like I'm hoping you're now thinking about some things about, okay, yes, I have experience in this, or I remember the time, through my 20s when I was in college and I was working here and I was doing this and I was, running on 5 hours of sleep, 3 or 4 times a week and getting all this stuff done. And, I was still able to, get through my internship or whatever. I'm hoping that you're starting to get the wheels, turning and getting a bit of a reflection about, your earlier career, your makeup, and what are some elements that maybe aren't truly technical in nature, but do um, contribute to some of the technical skills and how you can apply that to a team. And a lot of times, again, talking with some of these, early, cyber career people and people interested in the IT field, one of the things that I always again bugged me with some of the stereotypes is, I can't do this or I can't do that because X, right? I can't do cyber or IT because I can't code. Plenty of people can't code. Plenty of people have great IT careers and great cyber careers without programming skills. You can't be a software developer if you can't code. Well, AI, whatever. But right now, traditionally, there are specific domains where coding skills are important and can bring an element to your game. I met non-traditional software developers or IT people that have learned to code and have built amazing resources and tools to help their team. And then I've also seen people that climb the ladder without any coding skills at all because they have very specific knowledge or just the ability to kind of lead a team. And I think, some of these elements that I have here are very important because these, what I would call like superficial stereotypes, that come across, people is it's just, a bit of an imposter syndrome, right? Like somebody has maybe influenced them, somebody has maybe given them some bad advice, or maybe they see, okay, this person that I know very well is an expert in their field because they have this, but it may be a bit short-sighted because maybe there's another skill that makes them successful. But what you first, see, the first impression you get is, oh, so and so is a great programmer, or so and so, had 15 years experience or a law degree, and that's why they're able to move into this position. But I think a lot of it is, you know, again, a superficial, a face value type thing, to where there's a lot of opportunities that even if you don't meet everything on paper or have certain limitations, that those aren't necessary roadblocks. They may be obstacles, but they're not showstoppers when it comes to being able to find a way to work around that. And I didn't really have this slide originally when I was working through this, and going through the revisions, but I really wanted to make this clear that a key point to all this is that I'm not saying that, you won't have to be a team player, that, you can carve out some special skills and, you can really hone this niche and be a bit of a cyber diva and still be part of a successful team. And that's just not, quite frankly, that's just what I don't want to be, right? I don't want people to get the impression that, you can just have very specialized and technical knowledge and be a highly valuable member of the organization. There's been plenty of people I know that do that, but quite often, I see these individuals come and go in organizations, right? Because one of these things, they're not a team player, or they believe because they knew all there was about Server 2012, they don't need to learn anything else. And again, I want to make sure that I feel like most people here would probably be in the right frame of mind, that they're looking at developing themselves and growing. But I I want to make sure that I kind of drive this home, is that there's not a get rich quick scheme when it comes to IT and cyber. Yes, there is some great paying positions. It is a very rewarding field, but you have to sign yourself up for all these things that I feel is listed. You're going to have to know you're going to have some stressful days. Things aren't going to go your way. You're going to have peers that are going to challenge you in some of your thoughts because they feel a certain way, right? And you're going to have to learn how to navigate those, both from a technical and a soft skills perspective. And I think that's very important. Just to be able to drive that home and then take that into understanding that, there are going to be, ins and outs of when it comes to the cyber field, and you're just not going to be able to have, certain specialized knowledge and be a a long part of an organization like that. Um, and again, going into the key points, as far as what I want to make, my ultimate goal for this is to, come up with some case scenarios and come up with some ways that, hopefully you can, wrap up this webinar and take some of this advice with you and apply it today. I came out with some resumes, right? In all honesty, ChatGPT did some resumes, right? I just wanted to come up with a very general, very basic, application when I'm thinking about someone that would be, wanting to get into the IT field. And so, while I'm talking through this, feel free to ignore me and just read through the resume, see what you can see. And one of the things that I'm looking at is when I see a resume like this would be for someone looking to enter the cyber field. This is some things that I'm going to highlight that would jump out to me as, okay, this is why I would want to have a conversation with this person. So I can see right now for Anne here, while not having IT knowledge and having IT experience, I can see that, as a high volume bartender in the same restaurant, she moved over to a beverage supervisor. So she can be promoted within, right? This is somebody that can be trained. This is someone that it grows, that has leadership skills, that has the ability to manage and perform at a high level. She has compliance, right? Because she was working with health and safety regulations. If you've worked in the food and beverage industry, there is a lot of things you need to do and to do it right. Ensuring with those compliance and quite frankly, a lot of those have somewhat damning penalties and repercussions. So I think that is a very high stakes compliance scenario compared to some of the stuff that we see and even in the cyber realm. So if you've been able to ensure compliance and work in certain areas, maybe it's healthcare, maybe it's in other areas, manufacturing, Q&A. There's a lot of things that you can do, to illustrate that, or at least I see as having a cross-functional value. Seeing during the bartender, serving up to 200 customers per night. So this one is, high stakes, high performing, being able to be calm under pressure and to develop a product and to be, capable of promotion even under high stress. I see the education, I see the ability to manage and leadership. So to me, this seems like someone that I think has all the soft skills and the things that I would look to and really want to explore a conversation with this person because they have all the innate capabilities of being able to be a high performing individual, just maybe needing to flip that into the IT realm. And so I think, modifying the professional summary, I am not an HR guru. Do not take this as gospel. These are just some things that I would think of as like, okay, this is my, initial instinct to Anne of, okay, how can you, advocate for yourself a little better? How can you, highlight some things that really are skill sets that are needed on the IT and security team, but maybe you don't have from previous experience. And I think another important thing again for these cyber entrants, when you don't have technical experience or firsthand, hands-on experience with working this in a professional environment, talk about other things: hack the box, boot camps, cybersecurity conferences, computer coach, training, whatever events that you can, highlight, saying, okay, yes, I don't have any experience with, setting up and working in a sim, and in a professional environment, but during my own labs and my own boot camps, we contributed into an exercise where we had to do incident response. And, being able to highlight that in a certain area of your resume. Okay, we got another one here. So Cynthia is kind of early career IT, wanting to transition more into cyber. Has a little bit of IT experience, coming from an education help desk, working on that for a few years, then moving into more of a cloud system administrator. So again, same thing. Want to highlight some things that stand out to me and why I believe this person could be a likely candidate for cyber. So one of the things that really stand out to me, kind of first and foremost, is these certifications. And certifications are a nebulous topic when it comes to a lot of people in the field. But to me, one of the things that I see is that this is somebody that is signing themselves up for a lifetime of education. Because as soon as you start pursuing it, certifications, you're going to have to keep up with CPEs. You're going to have, you're looking to illustrate, that domain knowledge. And quite frankly, some of my frustrations with peers in the industry is, I've been doing this for 20 years. I don't need to prove my knowledge. I don't need to tell anybody how great I am. and I'm stuck and set in my ways. And a lot of times, this person ends up being some of the most cancerous individuals on the team, even though they are some of the most respected individuals on the team because of their experience. And so, I think to me, seeing someone that does have the knowledge and just has the capabilities, but is also looking at pursuing, certifications, pursuing domain knowledge, and is looking to continue their education path, huge win for me. And I can see, for Cynthia's time, through 22 to 2025, she's pursued new angles. She's pursued new certifications. She's constantly looking at improving and expanding on her domain knowledge. And I think that's a huge value add when it comes to any team. I think one of the things too with this is I can see even just on the tech, she was working with leadership to manage vulnerabilities. She already had a hand in some of the compliance efforts and working with things that are maybe atypical from a traditional help desk responsibility. But for some reason, she was trusted to handle this. Now that I see kind of in the cloud, system administrator, I see a very talented engineer that can build standards, create best practices, monitor vulnerabilities. And so I think of someone here that can absolutely make it the next step into a cyber role because they do have experience into um, technology tools and security tools, but that may not be a formal job title of theirs. And so again, what are some things that I would, recommend is just making sure that, she's highlighting those specific things. So while not being a traditional security practitioner, she was able to take her IT responsibilities and her IT knowledge and further the security agenda by, remediating vulnerabilities and building standards and being able to kind of be a lead when it comes to the engineering efforts for the sake of security. And again, with this, my whole goal of this is, trying to help you get the wheels turning to find your angle. I know a lot of people in the HR realm and people in sales and in different positions. When you're in a resume, or when you're creating a resume, when you're in an interview, you're a salesman, regardless of your sales experience. Whatever you're signing yourself up, you have to be a salesman for yourself. And I think the idea of this is that you're looking to establish your angle of why your resume or why your interview and what you bring to the table in order to land this job position. So while having the competency, having all the skill sets for the technical knowledge, maybe you are destined to be the world's best SOC analyst. But if you can't figure a way to advocate for yourself of how you're going to contribute to the team, how you're going to be a team player, how you're going to resolve conflicts when you may disagree with a peer or a business partner, that's what you have to do. And so while having the technical knowledge is nice and a value add for any type IT or security team, it's not a panacea to getting the position. You're going to have to find a way for you to advocate for why you're a fit, and some of that is going to be not just strictly in technical. And I think you can absolutely find an angle where you can say, okay, I can be a SOC analyst or I can be an engineer here, even though I don't have domain expertise in this today. I do have a 15-year history of learning and switching career paths and mentoring others that I feel like I could be a value add that way. And so that's just what I'm hoping getting the frame of reference there. I think another piece to it that I think is very important is, the friends we make along the way. I think again, earlier in my career, I had a lot of people that I asked and I looked up to. And sometimes I came away from that dejected. I saw people that I thought knew it all and had everything, and then they would give me advice or they would put me down. Oh, you can't make it in security, or you can't make it in IT because you don't do this, or you don't have this experience, you don't have that, and that's disheartening. But I think over the years, the people that I've talked to that's given me good advice, that's taken time out of their day for 5 minutes and given me a different piece of reflection, that's the value in this industry. This is why I personally do this. This is why I wanted to take this time and give this webinar, because I remember having all these questions and not having an outlet, or not having someone just give me 30 minutes of their time for the day to just guide me and to send me in a direction. Because I think at the end of the day, this is what really matters, is being able to find some people that are willing to share those moments with you. And then when you do find someone that has a concrete influence on your life, doing the things you need to do in order to further that relationship, right? If they ask you to do something, or they recommend something, showing that effort, going that mile of saying, yeah, hey, I appreciate sending me that email. Hey, I appreciate that recommendation. I read through it. I had some questions. I'd love to take you for coffee sometime and talk through them. Just being, expanding that relationship, because I think ultimately when it comes to developing your career, the battle is won in the trenches of networking. Who and the relationships you foster and the experience you bring is by all some of the most important um, avenues when it comes to career development. And I think for a lot of people earlier in their career, that imposter syndrome is going to be okay. I think it's okay to understand that I do feel a little intimidated because I'm not the brightest person on my team. I don't have 15 years experience like Joe has, or whatever the case may be. And I think that's okay to to reflect on that and say, okay, I don't have that knowledge today, but can I leverage my peer group? Can I go get certifications? Can I self study and find projects that can give me that experience and give me that knowledge, and be able to catch up to that? And I absolutely believe you can. And kind of the final piece of advice here, something that I've heard from others, and something, again, I've come across this in different forums, and I absolutely love the saying. Because again, I was early in my career, I had, plenty of people, probably 50-50, right? For each individual that I asked about, hey, I want to go into this, or hey, I'm interested in doing this, or quite frankly, some people, just giving their opinion, whether you ask for it or not. And I think the advice here of not taking criticism from someone you wouldn't take advice from is absolutely critical to your own mental health and to your own career development. Because the whole idea and the frame of mind is this: is that if this isn't someone that you would trust to give you life changing advice, that you would absolutely take to heart, and someone that's close to you, that has experience, that knows this industry, you shouldn't be able to, or you shouldn't really fall in their criticism. Because I've heard countless stories of this happening. Not only to myself but other people earlier in their career, where people have maybe discounted them or dejected them from a certain opportunity because they didn't believe that they would be a good fit. But that's a personal problem to them and not a personal reflection on you. And if this isn't someone that you would go to get concrete advice on what you should be doing in your life, then you shouldn't give them the authority to really influence your decision on your career path and your own path to success. So that's kind of my wrap up on this one. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Like I said, I really enjoyed preparing this because I really wanted to cut it short and make it sweet, but really include some of the advice that I wish someone told me, 7 years ago when I was starting to look into this stuff, and needing some guidance. Because navigating navigating good advice is hard enough. Navigating good and bad advice is even more difficult. And so, I'm hoping that I can give you some of the tools to take away here to, be able to make heads or tails of that, and be able to take your own, introspective and developing your future.
That was spectacular. Thank you so much. Just hold on just a moment.